Serious, what are some of the creepiest declassified documents made available to the public?
This isn't creepy, just stupid and life-threatening. About 10 to 15 years ago, I worked for a company involved in designing military equipment used for counter-IED, improvised explosive devices applications, i.e., dealing with roadside bombs. These were widespread in Iraq and Afghanistan and posed a major threat to Allied forces. One day we stumbled across a document published online by the CIA. It was a comprehensive guide to IEDs. It was clearly intended as an identification and recognition guide, but was far too detailed. It not only contained photographs and textual descriptions of various IEDs, but had details of their internal design, circuit schematics, weaknesses etc. In short, it provided a great resource for anyone who wanted to manufacture IEDs, as well as alerting the enemy to flaws and weaknesses in their existing designs. We pointed this out to the relevant authorities and the document disappeared shortly afterwards. It was a fascinating document and I only wish I'd kept a copy.
A lot of people don't realize this, but during wars and other significant military campaigns, countries capture one another's records. Much of this tends to be banal bureaucratic stuff, but in the case of governments that are meticulous record keepers, there are sometimes volumes of damning information about war crimes. The US National Archives has a rebel archives, captured from the CSA during the Civil War. It contains descriptions of the treatment of prisoners of war, some of which are gruesome. Union medical officer logs are no better.
Everything from the Nixon vault. My least favorite cringiest tape is the HMO insurance tape where they realized that health insurance companies could make more money by denying service to sick people. Which is still the basis for the system we have today.
The project with the girl living in the half-flooded apartment with the dolphin. Also the FBI's campaign against liberation movements. Writing letters, hiring people to get close to and marry leaders, assassinations, and all manner of things. Also the weirdest was probably when our tax dollars paid for agents to wine and dine Cuban bands in Europe and encourage them to write anti-Cuban music haha.
On January 3, 1961, a United States B-52 bomber went into a tailspin and broke up midair, accidentally dropping two Mark 39 hydrogen bombs over Goldsboro, North Carolina. One of the bombs worked exactly as intended, its parachute deployed and its triggers activated, armed and ready to detonate on impact. 3 of the 4 safety switches failed, a single low-voltage switch prevented 2 4-megaton nuclear explosions.
After reading this thread, I no longer trust the government in any way, shape, or form.
Not exactly officially released, but the high-level Scientologist papers accessible through WikiLeaks are pretty batshit crazy. Edit, as I don't want to get sued by the church, I'll let others tell the whole story, but from what I've read, and there's a lot that I haven't, everything said in that South Park episode of Scientology is essentially correct.
My dad would bring me UFO reports from Air Force pilots once they became declassified. I believe it took them 70 years to become public, so they were all from the 30s and 40s.
Aren't the JFK files supposed to be declassified this October?
I'm surprised no one has mentioned Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was the secretive United States Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency (JIOA) program in which more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians, many of whom were formally registered members of the Nazi Party and some of whom had leadership roles in the Nazi Party, including Wernher von Braun's rocket team, were recruited and brought to the United States for government employment from post-Nazi Germany after World War II. The primary purpose for Operation Paperclip was for the US to gain a military advantage in the burgeoning Cold War and later space race between the US and Soviet Union.
Came for creepy, got depressed instead.
I think it was called Project Timmy. They wanted to drop 1/2-ton iron rods from space that would have similar efforts to an atom bomb with no fallout.
Geez, the LBJ presidential recordings. What a nutbag he was. He was perving out on Jackie Kennedy after JFK's assassination.
The audio recordings of the final sermon at Jonestown. I think the worst bit isn't the people cheering at the idea of their own deaths, it's the children crying as they're being force-fed the cyanide, and then the eerie silence when they stop crying. FBI declassified the tapes a while ago, they're easy to find online. Haunting stuff though, can't shake it from my brain. ETA, people keep asking if it was classified. It was, by the FBI. They wouldn't release the tapes until they were officially declassified, despite petitions in court from surviving relatives etc. The info is all there if you wanna search for it. This is becoming of one my favorite post ever, so much interesting information.
You can read the speech that was written for the president in the event that the Apollo 11 crew were stranded or died on the moon. It's creepy and horrifying to think about.
United States v. Reynolds. A military plane crashed, killing 9 of the 13 crew members. 3 of the widows sued. The widows asked the government to release the accident reports of the crash, something they were legally entitled to in the discovery process. The government refused to comply, asserting national security. This case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, which used the case to explicitly found the state secrets privilege. The Supreme Court denied the widow's request and allowed the government to withhold evidence that it claimed was vital to national security. Years later, the accident reports were finally declassified, and there was nothing related to national security in them. The government had lied to the court to prevent evidence from getting out that would harm its case. Any declassified report that indicates the government lied to oversight committees really scares me. What the fuck are you supposed to do when the steps we take to watch the government are compromised by the government's ability to lie to itself and citizens? The Senate torture report, for instance, also included findings of the CIA misrepresenting facts to oversight groups such as the United States Congress.
Microwave auditory effect. We can literally make voices appear in your head from nowhere.
Tapes made by David Parker Ray, Toybox Killer. He was a sadist who made a trailer where he would brutally torture his victims. He made tapes explaining what they were going to go through, and he would make them listen to it after abducting them. You can Google the recordings and listen to the audio. This guy was seriously evil. He spent hundreds of thousands on his toy box. And it was so terrible and brutal that the FBI agent who was investigating everything after he was discovered ended up shooting herself because she couldn't stand it. Edit, a word. During World War II, the US was developing a bat bomb. It was literally a giant canister filled with bats. The bats would have explosives strapped to them and would be released over a city. After a designated period of time, the bats would have spread out and then exploded. This would have caused a lot of damage, especially to cities that had a lot of wood, while not killing many citizens. But, after a few years of development, it was replaced by our friend, the A-bomb.
Y'all motherfuckers need to learn how to link.
Camera aka Laboratory 12, the Soviet assassination laboratory. Reading through some of the ways they've killed you, it becomes clear that the number one thing keeping most people safe is their mundanity. Like the amount of people poisoned in broad daylight without them even realizing it is crazy, it's indefensible even if you knew it were coming. One of the more interesting ones was a man who knew he was targeted, so he holed himself up in a hotel with guards. The assassins sprayed a poisonous substance on the lamp shade with like a tube. When the man turned his lamp on hours later, the substance evaporated due to the heat and killed everyone in the room. Another was radioactive rat poison. The target went to the hospital knowing he had been poisoned, and he was treated for common rat poison, which is what he had been poisoned by. He then died as the symptoms of his radiation poisoning had been masked by the symptoms of the rat poisoning.
I think the mind control MKULTRA docs are far worse than we typically give them credit for. Lots of talk of kooky LSD experiments and psychics, not so much talk of inducing multiple personality disorder to create an unknowing Manchurian candidate. The documents claim that in the mid-1950s they could trigger an alternate personality in a hypnotized subject, have them fire what they believed was a loaded gun at the doctor, then have them forget all knowledge of these events when they return to their everyday personality. They'd have no indication of having alternate personalities, and they'd do their best to mentally avoid or explain any way discrepancies, as dissociation is part of the mind's defense mechanism against itself. The worst part? Torture is the only guaranteed way to induce multiple personality disorder, but even then it's not guaranteed unless the victim is age 5 or under, before the ego is formed. You still with me? There are recent, confirmed cases of this technique being employed by governments and cults. For an easily confirmed example, search for a Salon article called James Bond and the Killer Bag Lady regarding the assassination of a CIA asset. Note both doctors worked on MKULTRA. Now search for Dr. Donald Dudley and you'll find an AP article where he was caught programming young autistic children and teaching them to shoot. Sorry, I'm on mobile, so if you need links or sources, PM me. I have mainstream sources and docs to back it up, and many more leads if you're interested. There's also a zip file containing 10,000 MKULTRA docs released through FOIA.
In the 1960s, during the time period where the Canadian government was trying to wipe out Aboriginal beliefs, they were abducting children from their homes and giving them up for adoption in the United States and other countries. The Canadian government was also putting these children into residential schools where they would beat and sexually assault these children to try and beat the Indian out of them. The government was very anti-Aboriginal for a long time.
I'm not sure if this quite fits what you're asking for, but I think it's interesting. In the early 2000s, I was a young airman stationed at Minot AFB as an ICBM maintenance technician. One of the "hey new guy, check this shit out" things was a series of reports from the late 60s. There were multiple reports from AF security forces and missile maintenance teams from Minot, Malmstrom, and Fay Warren, all detailing encounters with UFOs, aliens out in the missile fields. I can't remember all the details, but in many cases the missiles were disabled and rendered inoperable. If I remember right, all these reports were declassified, so should be available to the public. I've tried looking this stuff up online, but all I can ever find is references to the events on UFO conspiracy sites, and I don't really find that trustworthy. If anyone knows what I'm talking about and has more info, I'd love to see some links.
The remaining JFK assassination documents are going to be released to the public in October 2017, so that will be pretty crazy.
Reading all of these posts from around the world, I can't help but think about how the internet is going to change the way in which we all live, are governed. 10 years ago, most of us would have never known the details behind these operations. We may not even know about them. How will our ability to share previously unknown information change the way things happen in the future? Will we see less of these horrible undercover things, because those conducting know there is a good chance the rest of the world will find out?
Consider subscribing.